So I just wanted to start today by talking a little bit about the homework assignment from last week, right? By and large, you guys actually really did pretty well for your first crack at this. The one thing that I did kind of notice overall that everybody needed to work on a little bit, a lot of you aren't separating clearly yet between evidence and interpretation, right? And look, this is really, really hard to do, particularly if you're not used to doing it, right? Our brains like to fill in patterns for us. Sort of like the stupid autofill function on your phone that just keeps suggesting words to you, whether they're the words you actually want or not. Right? It's faster that way. It's more efficient, right? It gives us more brain space to do other things. But what I want you to do is kind of short circuit that automatic pattern recognition response and just focus on the details in whatever you're looking at, right? So for example, our mental shorthand tells us, right, that if someone is pulling out their hair with bloodshot eyes, wide-eyed stare, and very pale skin, right, that this person is probably emotionally distraught, right? What I want you to try to do is not leap right to emotionally distraught when you see the image, right? What I'd rather you do is sit and give me all of these details first, right? Pull out all the details. Whenever you get this kind of sort of blanket impression, right, like this person looks emotionally distraught, or this person looks crazy, or this person looks aloof or shy, right? What I want you to do instead of telling me that is pull back and look at all of the things in the image that tell you that, right? Give me the details. This is what the writer Ernest Hemingway called five-finger exercise. Right? You think, when you feel a particular emotional response, right, or a particular intellectual response, you think back to the specific impression or impressions that gave you that response. And then try to put that into writing. Right? Basically what this is about, what we're trying to do right now, is break down everything we look at into usable units of evidence. Right? I want you to get used to having to provide evidence for any claim you make about anything that you look at. So does anybody have any questions about any of this so far? Go ahead.
What exactly does the five-finger exercise mean?
Five-finger, well, it comes from learning to play the piano. It's just a name. Basically, what Hemingway means is like, it's like that very kind of basic learning to use each finger independently thing, right? Breaking everything down into these smaller units rather than sort of thinking of them in terms of blanket impressions. That's all it means. Okay, anything else? Okay, then I'm going to introduce to you, before we get started today, the homework assignment for Thursday, right? Tonight, by tonight you're supposed to have that thing done with that essay on the philosophy of the Aztecs, right? If you've already got it done, great. If not, that's okay. And if you have questions about it, feel free to ask me after class. Actually, feel free to ask me, but does anybody have any questions about that assignment right now?
I don't know if I structured it correctly.
Okay, what I would say is don't worry. What do you mean about structure?
Like, you said not to do the whole introduction, body, conclusion stuff, so I just kind of wrote everything down.
Yeah, that's fine. That's it. I mean, the homework assignments aren't meant to be all that formal, by and large. As long as you're doing what I ask you, what the question prompt actually asks you to do, and what I ask you to do in class, I'm not really all that worried about whether it's structured as an essay or not. Yeah, Chase.
Wait, so it could be like 3 sentences as long as it answers the question, right?
It has to be at least 250 words. So it can be 3 very long sentences, I guess. But like 3 sentences that long are going to be pretty clumsy, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it does have to be 250 words. And it needs to answer the assignment prompt. But I'm not worried about your paragraph structure or things like that right now, right? Or introductions and conclusions, things like that, right? These are, like, what we're doing thus far are pretty much just thinking exercises. So yes, you have to have a little bit of room to stretch out your thoughts, but yeah, I'm not worried about introductions and conclusions and shit like that yet. We'll worry about that later when we start writing more formal essays. Any other questions about it? Yeah, Chase, go ahead.
Alright, so I didn't really understand that essay, but I tried to answer the best I could. So are you gonna do how do you if it was wrong, completely wrong, or you gonna just mark it out, or you just gonna do it based off the answers and what evidence you provided?
I am going to be looking at the things that you have to say about the essay and the evidence you provide for it, right? And I acknowledge that the way you read the essay might not be the way I read the essay, and may not be the way the author intended for you to read the essay, right? Look, I mean, this is one thing we're going to talk a little bit about today. Most meaning in any piece is accidental. That doesn't mean it's not there, that it's not valid, right? Just in conversation with our body language or even our verbal language, we say shit we don't mean to say all the time, right? We transmit to people signals that we don't mean to transmit constantly. And part of that is because, we're behaving according to certain culturally accepted codes, right? Without really thinking about it. We're just, we've been taught or trained to think in particular ways or to speak in particular ways, and we don't really think about them. So not every meaning that you're going to draw from something is something that the author intended, right? So that's one thing I'm going to say, don't worry about that really at all, right? I know in high school English classes a lot, right? There's a lot of talk what the author meant, that sort of thing. Generally, what the author meant, right, was to paint a picture or write a song or a poem or a story, right? Any meaning that we find in that is not necessarily going to be something that the author intended us to find. It's not like a secret code we have to break. Again, that doesn't mean it's not valid, that doesn't mean it's not there, and it tells us a lot about the cultural conditions that the author was operating under, right? Maybe it even tells us something about the author's thought processes. But we don't have to worry too much about what the author meant. In fact, I'm going to show you a video today that is going to be, that's signaling a lot of kind of accidental meanings, right? It's saying a lot of things it doesn't really mean to say. But how we do this, right? How we look at any particular piece, how we break it down, right? We first break it down into these little details. And then we look for a couple different types of pattern, right? The easiest type of pattern to find usually is what are called strands. Strands are patterns of repetition and emphasis. Now, we're not talking here about exact repetition of a particular word or a particular action or a particular image, right? When we talk about repetition, what we're talking about here is a set of related images, particularly if we find them in a text that isn't specifically about that sort of thing, right? So say we're reading a story that's about a wedding. And, there is, at one point, a noise is described as being like a cell door clanging. The groom's suit is described as, looking like prison blues. There might be, other sorts of references to incarceration, right? So what this would tell us is a particular attitude, like we got this pattern of prison-related language in the story about marriage, right? So we'd want to think about how that fits into the larger context of the story, right? Say, like, if you're reading a story about childhood, and there are all these images of, like sort of horses running free on the plains, right? It may not have anything directly to do with the plot, but it's signaling a particular attitude in the story towards childhood, right? So you want to look for these patterns of repetition and emphasis, these related images that sort of go through any particular text, right? We did that when we looked at the Diego Rivera painting on day one, right? We had the two related sets of figures, right? You had the figures at the bottom who, had, books and music and a harp, right? And all of these images related to, reading and the intellect and the arts, right? And then the figures at the top were all dressed like workers, and they were carrying tools and weapons, right? So both of those represented different strands within the same painting, right? Within the same image. Different sets of meaning. Are we clear on this so far? All right, so if we keep thinking about that same painting, then that shows us something as well about kind of the second type of pattern that we're going to be looking for, right? We call these binaries. Binaries are pairs of opposites. These may be things that we naturally think of as opposites. These may be things that the text in particular just seems to be placing in opposition to each other, right? So for example, what's the binary in that Diego Rivera painting? What are the things that are opposed to each other?
The workers and the middle, something high class.
Yeah, the big binary there, right, is the divide between the workers and the intellectuals, right? So, what you want to think about when you see something like that is, okay, why are they split up this way, and how is the painter, the author, whatever, relating them to each other? So just as a little bit of thinking exercise to get our brains going here, right? Think up some binaries for me. Think up some pairs of opposites, things we conventionally think of as opposites.
Hot and cold.
Okay, yeah, good. Good start. Hot, cold. All right. What else? Pardon? Old and new. Okay, yeah, good.
Happy, sad.
Happy, sad.
Slow and fast.
Slow and fast. All right, keep going. Give me a couple more.
Sweet and salty.
Sweet and salty. Okay. Pardon?
Up and down.
Up and down. Yeah. Very good. Sort of basic opposition. It's kind of good to know the difference. What else?
Tired and awake.
Tired and awake. Okay, tired and wakeful. All right, one more. You can do this. I know it's early.
Left, right.
Left, right. Okay. Thank you, James. Okay, so try to get used to looking for these kinds of pairs in anything that you read right now. These aren't necessarily going to be things that we think of as natural binaries, right? But there are always going to be things that the text you're looking at you're going to place in opposition to each other, right? And what you want to think about when you're doing this, right, is on which side does the text seem to be, right? Which side of the binary does it seem to prefer? Which side does it seem to favor? And why? Okay, so third thing you're going to want to look for is anything that doesn't seem to fit into a strand or like something that just seems out of place in the text, right? We call these anomalies. Right? What just doesn't seem to go with anything else? Again, to go back to the Rivera painting, right? The anomaly in that painting, the weird thing in the painting, is the fact that the only one in the painting who is looking at us, right, is the weird old guy with the funnel on his head. Right? So we've got this ridiculous figure who we're obviously supposed to think of as funny, right? Or absurd. And yet, it's the only one in the painting making any real human contact with us. None of the other figures are looking at us. So you want to look for these things that don't seem to quite fit. And you're often going to find that as a sort of a really kind of interesting place for making meaning, for making an interpretation. Okay, so let's try a little bit of practice with some of this. I'm going to show you a video of another common sketch. And what I want you to do while you're watching is think about these strands, binaries, and anomalies, right? Where do we see patterns of repetition? Where do we see patterns of emphasis? Or where do we see things that are clearly related to each other? Where do we see things that are in opposition to each other, people or ideas? And where do we see things that just don't seem to fit with anything else? Can we see that? Let's give it a minute. Let it warm up. All right, good enough.
Hello, register incomplete. Hello, miss. What do you mean, miss? Oh, sorry, I have a code. I wish to make a complaint. Oh, sorry, we're closing for lunch. Never mind that, my dear. I wish to complain about this parrot. What I purchased not half an hour ago from this very boutique. Oh, yes, the Norwegian blue. What's wrong with it? I tell you what's wrong with it, my dear. It's dead. That's what's wrong with it. No, it's resting, look. Look, my dear, I know a dead parrot when I see one, and I'm looking at one right now. No, that's not dead, it's resting. Resting? Yeah, resting. Remarkable bird, the Norwegian blue, isn't it? Beautiful plumage. The plumage don't enter into it. It's stone dead. No, it's resting. All right then, if it's resting, I'll wake it up. Hello, Polly! I've got a nice fresh cut of fish for you if you wake up, Mr. Polly Ballard. Daddy moved. No, you didn't. That was you pushing the cage. I didn't. Yes, you did. Hello, Polly! Wakey, wakey! Rise and shine! 6 your 9 o'clock alarm call! Well, that's what I call a dead parrot. No, he's stunned. Stunned? Yeah, you're stunned him just he was waking up. Norwegian blue stunned easily. Oh, I don't have enough of this. That parrot is definitely deceased. And when I bought it not half an hour ago, you assured me that its total lack of movement was due to it being tired and shagged out after a long squall. What? He's pining for the fields. Pining for the fields? What kind of talk is that? Look, why did it fall flat on its back the moment I got it out? Oh, well, the Norwegian blue prefers keeping on his back. Beautiful plumage. Look, I took the liberty of examining that parrot. then I discovered that the only reason that it had been sitting on its perch in the first place was that it had been nailed there. Oh, and of course it was nailed there. I mean, if I hadn't nailed it there, it would have muscled up those bars and boom! But yeah, mate, this parrot wouldn't do if you put 4,000 bolts through it. It's bleeding demise. No, it's pining. It's not pining. It's passed on. This parrot is no more. It has ceased to be. It's expired and gone to see its maker. This is a late parrot. It takes to bereft of life. It rests in peace. If you hadn't nailed it to the perch, you would be pushing up the daisies. It's run down the curtain and joined the choir invisible. This is an ex-parrot. Well, I've better replace it. If you want to get anything done in this country, you've got to complain to your clearing the mass. Sorry, Squire, I've had a long way right out of parrots. Thanks, I get a picture. I've got a slug. Does it talk? Not really. Will it scarcely replace me? This is... I didn't want to work in a factory. I wanted to be a lumberjack. I'm sorry, this is irrelevant, isn't it? Yes! A lumberjack! Leaping from tree to tree as they walk down the mighty rivers of British Columbia.
Okay.
We can't all be happy with our jobs. Okay, so let's start with binaries here because I think that's actually sort of probably the easiest thing to work with, right? So where do we see oppositions here? Where do we see paired opposites? What sorts of opposites are at work here? Any opposed ideas?
Dead and alive.
Okay, yeah, dead and alive, right? That's the thing that the whole argument hinges on, right? Is the parrot dead or is it alive? Even though the answer is pretty clear, right? Right? The damn thing is dead. Very, very, very dead. And who do we see having this particular argument? Does that constitute a binary as well? What are the roles that are filled by each of the two characters here?
Owner and customer.
Yeah, we got shopkeeper and customer, right? Customer on the dead side of the binary, shopkeeper on the alive side, right? And so why is it in the customer's interest to prove that the parrot is dead?
So you can get it.
Yeah, so he can get his money back or get the parrot replaced, right? And why is it in the shopkeeper's interest to prove the parrot is alive?
So we can keep the money.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to give the customer a refund, right? And where the tension in the scene results from is the shopkeeper's attempts to evade any responsibility to the customer, right? To try to demonstrate that he is not, that no, the parrot I sold you is alive, and I don't have to replace it or give you your money back, right? So the assumption on which this scene rests, right, is that a shopkeeper is supposed to deal honestly with us, right? A shopkeeper is not supposed to sell us shoddy merchandise, and if he does, he's supposed to give us our money back. But this shopkeeper tries to get. And what sorts of things does the shopkeeper try to do to get out of giving the customer his money back?
It's just sleeping.
Okay, yeah. It's resting. Yeah, how does he talk about the bird's various behaviors or lack thereof?
That he's tired.
Okay, yeah.
It's just
It's tired. Right? It's pining for the fjords. Right? It's homesick. Now, the whole fact that, he talks about the parrot pining for the fjords and he calls it a Norwegian blue should also be a sort of giveaway to us about the character of the shopkeeper, right? Are there any parrots in Norway? Yeah, not so much. Yeah, parrots are kind of tropical, right? So the fact that he calls the bird a Norwegian blue indicates either that he doesn't know what he's talking about or he's dishonest, right? What else has the shopkeeper done that's clearly dishonest, that sort of falls into this strand
He nailed the bird.
of shady behavior? Okay, yeah. He nailed a dead bird to its perch, right? And when he does finally acknowledge the customer's claim, how does he propose to fix it?
He said then he'd give him another bird. Or a snail.
Yeah. I don't have another parrot, I've got a slug, right? How could you tell? So the solution he proposes is in no way equivalent to the problem he's caused, right? And then, when the solution is unacceptable to the customer, what does the shopkeeper do?
He says he's going to be a lumberjack.
Yeah, he deflects, right? It's not my fault I don't like my job. I'd rather be a lumberjack. Now, what about the customer? What do we notice about the customer's behavior?
You got frustrated.
Okay, what suggests frustration in his behavior?
He beat up the dead bird.
Okay, yeah, he physically hammers the dead parrot against the table, right? Right, physically assaults dead bird. For which the shopkeeper also has a response, right? Oh, you stunned it, right? You stunned it just as it was waking up. What else do we see the customer doing?
He starts yelling.
Okay, he yells.
He's confused as to why the shopkeeper doesn't understand that the bird is dead.
Okay. What suggests that he's confused about the shopkeeper's attitude?
The tone in his voice and the words that he's saying.
Okay. Well, yeah. What's funny about the words that the customer uses? Does he keep repeating the same words over and over again? Kind of, but not quite, right? Does this guy seem to find an awful lot of creative ways to say this parrot is dead?
Yeah.
Right? It's a stiff, bereft of life, it rests in peace. It's run down the curtain and joined the choir invisible. Right? This is an ex-parrot. So he finds lots of different ways to say the same thing, right? Does the shopkeeper speak in the same register as the customer?
No.
Does he seem to have as many sort of creative reserves of language? He repeats himself directly a lot more, right? And the arguments that he makes up are simpler. So what might this vocabulary difference also indicate about the difference between the customer and the shopkeeper here?
That the customer is more, I don't want to say educated, but more sophisticated in a way than the shopkeeper.
Yeah, it indicates a class difference, right? The customer is probably better educated, maybe a little wealthier, and their accents are a little different too, right? The customer's accent is a little bit more refined, as his language is a little bit more creative. But the shopkeeper's actions are more creative, right? So the customer uses creative language in order to get what he wants. The shopkeeper uses creative action in order to keep what he has. Which do you think the scene favors? What side do you think the scene prefers? Who wins?
The customer,
Why do you think the customer wins?
because you can relate to the customer more.
Does the customer get what he's asking for?
No.
Yeah, because the shopkeeper's just going to go off and be a lumberjack, right?
Was this before the lumberjack video that you showed us last
Thi-
Thursday?
Yeah, this is the scene that comes right before it. Yeah, it leads into it. Yeah, Monty Python sketches tend to work that way. They tend to, like, once the scenes, the sketches don't really end, they just bleed into another one. But yeah, does the customer's language ultimately overcome the shopkeeper's ability to put him off?
No.
Yeah, shopkeeper wins, right? Little working class pet store owner beats snooty upper class customer. So even though we can probably more closely relate to the customer's situation, the shopkeeper is the winner in the scene. And let's be honest, I mean, who's the actual idiot here?
The customer.
Yeah, the guy who bought a dead parrot in the first place, right? The guy who believed a parrot that was sitting motionless in its cage, making no sounds, was still alive, right? So where the humor in the scene arises from is the kind of the shopkeeper finding various creative ways to not give the customer what, to defy our expectations of what is supposed to happen, right? That's usually how comedy works, right? It sets you up to expect something to happen and then gives you something else instead. Okay, so I gave you a lot of scaffolding for this one, right? I'm going to show you another video. This is from a show called Adam Ruins Everything. This is about the Electoral College and our wonderful magical voting system. And so I want you to try to do the same thing, right? I want you to look for binaries in particular, right? Things that are opposed to each other. Because I think that's where we're going to see the kind of really unintended meanings that come out of this. And look for others, these other patterns of related imagery as well, right? So, for example, you had the customer here, saying the same thing in different ways, right? That was a strand. You had the shopkeeper finding all these different ways to prove the bird was alive. That's also a strand, right? So look for the same sorts of things in this.
Every 4 years, we hear the words Electoral College over and over again, but we never talk about what a ridiculous and, frankly, undemocratic system it really is. The Electoral College gives vastly more power to different voters depending on which state they live in.
Bigger states.
Nope, smaller states. If your state has less people, you have more power. Not too many people live in Wyoming, but they have 3 electoral votes, or 1 for every 135,000 voters. California is packed with people, but they have 55 electoral votes, or 1 for every 411,000 voters. And that's totally out of proportion, because it means it takes 3 times as many Californians to earn 1 electoral vote, giving voters in Wyoming 3 times the power in the Electoral College. As a result of this system, your vote could count for less just because of where you live. Infographics rule, right?
Yeah, well, it does seem unfair, but who cares if the Electoral College is kooky? I'm kooky, I have two turtles.
Okay, well, it gets worse because the Electoral College also creates swing states.
Oh, I love the swing states. They make election night so exciting, kind of like when my turtles move a little.
Well, exciting. I think the fact that the entire election is determined by just a handful of states is really messed up. For one thing, it means presidential candidates can ignore almost the entire country. Hello, America. I'm Adam Conover, and I'm running for president of Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And boy, do I love Florida oranges, Philadelphia cheesesteaks, and whatever you people like in Ohio. The rest of the country can go suck a big one.
People in Ohio like LeBron James.
Who? I don't know many actors. Anyway, swing states have so much power that in recent elections, up to 80% of all the votes cast in America had no impact on the outcome. That includes your vote here in California.
Some states are red states and some states are blue states. That's the way America is.
Actually, most states are pretty purple. In 2012, over 3 million Texans voted Democrat.
I love barbecue, Blake Shelton, and abortions, y'all.
And almost 5 million Californians voted Republican.
Surf's up, y'all. You know what else needs to go up? Border wall with Mexico, dude.
If electoral votes were awarded proportionately, in 2012, 16 of Texas's electoral votes would have gone to Obama, and 20 of California's would have gone to Romney. But in our winner-take-all system, anyone who wants to vote for their state's losing party might as well just stay home.
Oh, bummer.
Okay, everybody, get out. I can't listen to any more.
How about we all vote?
Wait, who are all these people?
Oh, these are the electors. They're the people who actually vote for president.
I thought the Electoral College was just a name.
Nope, when we vote, we're actually just picking our state's electors. Then those electors get together and cast their ballots for president.
But who are they?
Oh, mostly retired politicians and party flats.
I'm the governor's rich cousin.
Okay, Mr. Smarty, that's just a technicality. They have to vote for who we choose.
Actually, in 24 states, they can vote for whoever they want. And that's happened over 80 times. In 2004, an elector in Minnesota cast his vote for someone named John Ewards, which was almost the name of John Kerry's running mate.
Did you mean John Edwards?
Yes. I may have a drinking problem.
That actually happened?
That actually happened. That elector's vote didn't go to John Kerry. It went to the guy running for vice president. The Electoral College is such a bad system, people have been trying to abolish it for centuries, but so far it's been politically impossible.
Okay, well, thank you for the information. I cannot believe our beautiful system has become so messed up.
Oh no, the Founding Fathers designed our system this messed up.
All right, hold on a minute, young man. You do not talk about the Founding Fathers like that. They were brilliant men who fought hard for my right to vote.
Actually, the Founding Fathers didn't think you should be able to vote at all. Or me. Or most Americans. Let's go back in time, and I'll prove it to you.
Okay, so how does this operate, right? Like, how is this set up? What tends to prompt responses from the host?
What do you mean? Like,
Okay, when the host here talks, right? What does he usually, how does he position himself? What usually happens before he says something?
the woman says something either incorrect or that he doesn't agree with, so he's trying to.
Yeah. We've got a sort of like, we've got a character here as a foil for him, right? So we have the host, and the host has a foil, right? And what's the host like? How would we describe the host?
He seems more educated or informed in a way.
Okay, yeah, he certainly presents himself as well-informed, right? What else can we say about him? Any characteristics of the host? Young, old?
He's really young.
Okay, yeah, young guy. Male. What about his attitude, his demeanor, his style of dress?
He dresses really nicely.
He's confident.
Okay, yeah. Speaks confidently, right? Sort of clean, crisp dress, right? But is he dressed like really formally?
Not really.
Sort of like business casual, right? What about his hairstyle, facial hair, anything like that?
His hair is well styled.
Okay, yeah, styled hair, kind of gelled up, right? And he has a beard. So, does he, I mean, he's well dressed, but does he look like a businessman type?
No.
No, he looks a little bit funkier than a businessman would, right? Now, what about his foil? What can we say about her?
She's a little older.
Yeah, older, good.
She's female.
Yep, an older woman.
She speaks, I don't want to say confidently, but she speaks like she's not wrong. She said
She's
how.
defensive.
Yeah, she's really
She's defensive, yeah. And the things she says, right, are the things she says, generally speaking, correct?
No, it's his opinion.
Yeah. Most of the things that she says are factually wrong, right? But they reflect conventional wisdom, right? They reflect what the average person thinks about the Electoral College, or what the average person thinks about our voting system, right? That, okay, there are red states and blue states, that swing states make everything interesting, right? That people in big states have more power than people in little states. So she is speaking here for conventional wisdom. Anything else we could say about her?
She dressed casual.
She's dressed more casually than he is, right? Yeah, kind of like your slightly hip grandma, right?
She's kind of quirky.
Yeah, a little bit quirky, right? She's got two turtles. Yeah, she comes off as a little bit quirky and a little bit loopy, right? Maybe grandma probably lived through the 60s. So, why does it matter that the correct information is placed in the mouth of a confident, young, well-dressed man?
Because it's showing that this generation can be more informed and more open to the possibility that not everything was right back when everyone was older.
Okay, yeah, I think that's part of it, right? That when he's aligning himself here with youth, with another generation that sees things differently, right? That doesn't see things the way their parents and their grandparents saw them. But what about the way he tends to jump on her statements?
You already know what she's gonna say.
Yeah, you can already predict what she's going to say when she's going to say it. He's always already got an argument ready made. And does he seem to treat her very respectfully?
No.
Not really.
Everything she says is wrong, right? And I mean, yeah, okay, most of what she says is factually wrong. But what's the first word of most of his responses to her? Well, actually, right? She barely finishes a sentence, and he jumps in with, well, actually, and gives her the correct fact, right? So, what else is going on in this video that may not have been intentional on the part of the people who produced it? What other sort of cultural issue does this reflect?
It's kind of like, I'm right and you're wrong. Like, I don't have to listen to you because you're older and I'm more educated.
Okay, yeah, there is definitely a level of age discrimination here, right? That the older person has to be wrong all the time. But what else is important about the foil here? Is she only different from him in that she's an older person? What else is she? Should be fairly obvious.
A woman?
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. We've got a young guy who is constantly mansplaining to an older woman, right? Constantly jumping in and interrupting her, constantly telling her that she's wrong, right? Constantly telling her that everything that she believes to be true is a lie. Now, this the factual information he presents is by and large correct. But what matters here, and the thing that I want us to think about here, is the way it's being presented. Right? That the person being put in the position of the idiot is a baby boomer woman who's being yelled at by a millennial man. So this tells us something about attitudes both towards the elderly and towards women in the culture at large, right? That it's expected that young people are going to correct old people. It's expected that men are going to mansplain to women, right? Did you guys notice anything weird or off in this video? Like anything that didn't seem to fit with anything else? Or any other patterns? Apart from our two sort of main characters here, what do we see?
Electoral College.
Okay, yeah. Why would they be talking about the Electoral College in the first place?
Is there in charge of voting?
I hope not. I hope they're not in charge of voting. Oh, the Electoral College is in charge of voting, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so when do we typically see lots of documentaries about the Electoral College or documentaries about presidential history or about voting or any of that sort of behavior?
Around election time.
Yeah, election years. So videos like this are usually a response to a particular cultural need, right? Or a particular cultural moment, right? During an election year, people want to talk about how we go about selecting our leaders, right? These sorts of topics come like, is the Electoral College actually fair? Is our first past the post electoral system actually fair, right? Because you live in a state, say Georgia, right, tends to vote Republican in statewide elections, right? But not by enormous margins, say 60 to 40, right? So what happens then to the votes of those 40% of people who didn't vote Republican, right? the point he makes here, right, may as well have stayed home. So that's what issues of fairness often come up when people talk about the Electoral College. So we can think of this in terms, what's the argument that this particular video is trying to make about the Electoral College?
That is not fair.
Yeah, the Electoral College is unfair, right? And what's the evidence he uses the Electoral College is unfair?
That they can vote for whatever party or for whatever person they want.
Okay, yeah, the electors don't have to vote for the candidate that people chose, right? They usually do, but in half the country they don't have to. What else makes the Electoral College unfair? What other evidence has he presented that's unfair?
That it's a bunch of upper class retired politicians.
Okay, yeah, that it's not exactly our best and brightest, right? Who are choosing our leaders. And what about the system by which the electors are chosen? What evidence does he present that that is unfair? When we talk about how things work sort of down at the state level. Yeah. If you live in Wyoming or you live in California, whose vote counts for more? Wyoming, right? Yeah. Fewer electoral votes, right? Because fewer people. But you don't need as many people to equal one electoral vote in Wyoming as you do in California, right? So the basic arguments that he's making is that the system is unfair, it's set up by and to benefit the rich. The electors have no real incentive to listen to the will of the people. And voters in big states and urban areas tend to be disadvantaged when it comes to representation, right? Not only that, but if you live in a state, if you vote for the candidate that doesn't win your state, right, then your vote is essentially wasted. So we talk about these issues in terms of pitch, complaint, and moment. Right, so the pitch is the argument that the piece is making, right? The pitch is what the piece wants you to believe. So in this case, the pitch would be that the Electoral College is unfair, right? The pitch would be that it distorts democracy. The moment refers to the specific context in which the argument occurs, right? Why are we having this discussion now? Why are we having this argument at this time? Because it was an election year, right? This aired in 2016. Now, airing this in 2018, maybe a little bit behind the curve, right? Or ahead of the curve, depending on how you're thinking about it. Yeah, but the context for this would be, it's an election year, so people want to know about and talk about these issues. So the argument, the pitch is that the Electoral College is unfair. The moment is election year. The complaint is the specific issue, the specific problem that the argument is trying to address, right? It's not what it wants you to believe, it's the particular problem that gave rise to the argument in the first place. So the complaint in this case would be inequity in vote allocation due to the Electoral College, right? Due to the system in place. And if we look at the title as well here, right? Why the Electoral College ruins democracy, right? Do we believe generally that in a democracy all votes should count for the same amount? theoretically, everybody's vote is supposed to be equal, right? And so, right, this inequity in vote allocation undermines the idea of democracy. That's the basic complaint here. Now, we saw through sort of looking at this host and foil binary, right, and the various strands that are attached to each character, that the way this is presented is a bit problematic. But this is sort of the basis of what's going on here, right? That's the pitch, that's the complaint, that's the moment, that's the context. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the homework assignment for next time. I'm going to distribute the assignment to you, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time, or at least the sample for the assignment. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to look over this sample and start working on the homework assignment and ask me questions as you are working. Right, so here's what you're going to do. Right, this is assignment 2 on page 86, I think. Yes? Yes. So I'm going to give you a piece to read. It's the prologue to J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's called Concerning Hobbits. It's about 12 pages long. So what you are going to do with this, right, you are going to write 2 different summaries of the piece. Each will be 250 words. Now, everybody knows what a summary is, right? What's a summary? Explain to me what I mean by a summary here. When I tell you I want you to write a summary, what do I want you to do? Yeah, I want you to boil down for me, right, the essence of what it is you just read, right? Now, if I am asking you to boil down 12 pages to 250 words, right, you're going to have to be very selective about what you decide is important, right? So what this exercise, at least the first half of this exercise, is about is determining which elements in the piece are most important for understanding what it is it's trying to say, right? And so try to think of them in terms of this, pitch, complaint, and moment, right? So what does it want you to believe about its subject? What specific issues or misconceptions or whatever does it seem to want to correct about the subject, right? What is it, what situation on your part is it responding to? And what is the specific context in which this is occurring, right? Now, so your first summary, as I said, will be a general summary, right? You're going to try to summarize the whole thing in 250 words. Your second summary will cover only one strand, binary, or anomaly. So you're going to choose one of these kinds of patterns that we talked about, right? Either a pattern of repetition and emphasis, a pair of opposites that the text puts together, or something weird that doesn't seem to quite fit with anything else. And you're going to summarize the way that moves through the reading. All right, so I have copies of the reading here for you. So you can have the next 10 to 15 minutes to look this over, right? Read through it and get started working on your summary. And if you have any questions, right, you can go ahead and start. You can go ahead and ask them.
We can keep this, right?
Oh yeah, I don't need these back. Generally, if I give you a handout, you can keep it.